Good morning. Hello, everybody. It's a little bit before noon on Friday, November 22nd. This is the Friday reading. I want to give everybody just a couple of minutes to come on in and say hi. I am going live a little bit earlier than expected. So, whoop, let, let me go. There we go. Let me go ahead and mute that. Just want to make sure that everything is in working order. Yeah, looks good. Okay. Looks good over there. Let's check it out over here. So I hope everybody's doing okay. Today is Friday, November 22nd. Hope you guys had a great week so far. As you know, Tuesday was kind of an amazing change in our dynamics, and one of the things that I talked about in the in Pluto moving into Aquarius is the idea that we need to go to those liminal spaces, the idea that there are the in-between spaces of stories that we're told that we're not necessarily there isn't a lot of transparency in the way the news presents information to us. So, one of the things that Pluto moving into Aquarius does is it gives us permission to then look into those in between spaces. I have a little coffee here, so don't mind me while I caffeinate. So, one of the things that I thought was really interesting was when the story of Matt Gaetz broke out, and I think that's how you pronounce his last name. To be honest, I don't pay too much attention, too much of anything regarding that. But when his story broke yesterday that he was resigning his not only resigning his position, I think, but also withdrawing his nomination for Attorney General. I said, you know what? There's got to be more to this story than just what we're being fed, just what we're being told. It sounds like your tired trope of being Me Too'd once again, right? So, obviously, if there has been some kind of behavior that's untoward or inappropriate, obviously I would be, supportive of the victims, and whatever recourse they may have. But if there is such a thing, but there's also a whole other side, and even stories that go beyond the stories that we're not being told. And so I think what I'm going to try to do is take a little bit of time and go through it. And this morning I stumbled upon a Twitter account that I found really fascinating. But I took it a little bit beyond that. So, what the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to read a series of tweets. This is the Friday reading, after all. So, I thought, wow, this is really fascinating. And even JP said, you know what, you should read this. This is really interesting. So let's go ahead and go there. This is crazy. This is like a Netflix movie. I'm not kidding. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they turn this into some kind of Netflix, like limited production. Okay, let me know if you can see this Twitter link that I've just put up. What I want to do is make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so the person that I'll be reading from, she goes by Village Crazy Lady on Twitter, or Mel is her name, and she's a Southern woman, and she loves her family and her country. And so she is a sort of homegrown journalist, I guess you could say, and she unpacked and unrolled a whole bunch of information about Matt Gaetz and what led up to the moment that we're in right now. And I thought it was so fascinating. I was like, I've got to share this. Okay, so here we go. She says, "All right, friends, now that Matt Gaetz is out of the running, you're going to hear a lot of takes on what happened and plenty of keep your in your pants lines too. And while that's always good advice, the story I'm about to share goes way beyond anything you could possibly imagine. So, if you're interested in the whole story, consolidated in one place of what really happened with and to Mr. Gaetz, take a seat and let me tell you a story." Part 1, The Tax Collector. The story begins in fall of 2019 in Florida with this man, Joel Greenberg. At the time, Joel Greenberg was 2.5 years into his first term as the tax collector for Seminole County. Greenberg is your classic rich kid who drinks through life, lighting fires everyone else is forced to put out, never landing hard because daddy's money always catches his fall. You know the type. We all do. And Joel approached his role as tax collector no different than any other. By the fall of 2019, Seminole County was awash with rumors about the federal investigation into Greenberg's crypto scam with tax collector dollars. Now, these rumors inspired a local music teacher, Brian Butte, to throw his hat in the ring and challenge Greenberg in the Republican primary slated for the following year. Despite the many advantages that Greenberg held over Butte in the race, incumbency, wealth, name recognition, and etc., Greenberg's significant criminal activity as tax collector likely contributed to him becoming obsessed with destroying Butte, both publicly and privately. Let's see. And then I got to show more replies here because it goes on for a while. We're not done yet. So throughout late 2019 and into 2020, Greenberg rolled out a series of ever escalating smear tactics targeting Butte. They started rather typical, labeling Butte, who is from Michigan, as a carpetbagger. But they grew increasingly vicious. He created fake Facebook profiles pretending to be Butte's students, leaving comments on public posts trashing Butte as an awful teacher and a pervert. And so here's an example of that information coming out. So just to recap, Mr. Greenberg is currently the tax collector in this story that she's relaying to us. He's a tax collector for Seminole County, and he's so corrupt and he's such a piece of shit that this local music teacher, Brian Butte, decided to go up against him in the next race. Okay, so out come the gloves, here comes the smear campaign like you get with politics, right? So Greenberg's antics finally reached an apex when he mailed handwritten letters to the administrators at the school where Butte taught, accusing him of sexually assaulting his students. Greenberg probably didn't expect those letters to be taken so seriously, or else he likely would have been a little more careful. But he wasn't. And when the letters were turned over to the local sheriff's office, both his fingerprints and his DNA were lifted from them, and he was arrested on June 23rd of 2020 and charged by the Department of Justice with stalking. Now, at the time of his arrest, Greenberg's phone was confiscated and searched. And believe it or not, this is where the real legal troubles for him begin. On his cell phone and later his home computers, police found evidence of Greenberg committing damn near every crime in the book: embezzlement, drugs, prostitution, identity theft, wire fraud, crypto market manipulation. But the silver tuna was a series of messages that occurred in the late spring through early fall of 2017 between Greenberg and a then 17-year-old girl, discussing, among other things, their many sexcapades around Florida and beyond. Further investigation revealed that from December of 2016 through 2018, Joel Greenberg was a customer on a sugar daddy website where he solicited various women for sex and escort services. And this is where he met the aforementioned 17-year-old girl. Okay, and she includes the documentation for all these legal proceedings around this. Now, all told, Mr. Greenberg spent over $70,000 on hookers he met on the Sugar Daddy website, much of which he paid for with his government-issued American Express card. Oh dear. In August of 2020, the Department of Justice charged Joel Greenberg with sex trafficking of a minor, identity theft, and production of false identification documents, among other things. Because it turns out in Florida, the Office of a County Tax Collector doesn't just collect taxes, they also issue driver's licenses and state IDs. So Mr. Greenberg took full advantage of this privilege during his time in office because he not only created multiple false Florida ID cards for himself, but he also created a fake ID for his underage lover after finding out that she had been lying to him about her age. And this is where Matt Gaetz comes into the story. So let me just pause here for a minute and remind you that when people tell you who they are, believe them. So now, did Matt Gaetz know that Joel Greenberg was found guilty of, trafficking a minor and obviously abuse of power and using his American Express card to get strippers or hookers or whatever? Did Matt Gaetz know any of this about his new friend? I don't know. We don't know. It's not clear. But when people tell you who they are, believe them. So from what I can gather, Gaetz and Greenberg became acquainted at some point in the first half of 2017. The first public record of them associating on a private level comes from a picture posted to Twitter on July 8th, 2017, with none other than Roger Stone. And you guys probably know that name. I'm not going to go into who Roger Stone is. Okay, so there's Joel Greenberg, a county tax collector. There's Matt Gaetz, and then there's Roger Stone. Okay. I think it's safe to say that the two did become friends, but how good of friends did they become? Well, that's up for debate, but there was a relationship. So after getting arrested in June of 2020, at some point, Mr. Greenberg or his lawyers approach Bill Barr's Department of Justice with a proposition. Joel Greenberg claims that he can provide as evidence that a sitting congressman, Matt Gaetz, had engaged in sex acts with a minor. Well, the Department of Justice then proceeds to open a secret investigation into these allegations, and it remains a secret until it is leaked the next spring on March 30th, 2021 by the New York Times. So before we go into part 2, let me just put this out there. Do you think that Greenberg set Gaetz up in some way? Is there something more to the story? Or is it something like Joel Greenberg, didn't want to serve his sentence, and so he thought he could get a reduced sentence by coming forward with information and basically snitching on Matt Gaetz? That happens a lot, right? For reduced sentences, people provide information to investigators or, the police or the Department of Justice. So it sounds like something like that, in my opinion, something pretty simple. Now let's move on to part 2, the man in Iran. So faithful viewers of the Tucker Carlson show were treated to a peek behind the DC curtain on a random Tuesday night in late March of 2021. Earlier that day, the New York Times had released a bombshell story alleging that the Department of Justice had opened an official investigation into Matt Gaetz over allegations that he had engaged in sex with an underage girl. Following Tucker's opening monologue, he introduced Matt Gaetz and gave him free rein to tell his side of the story. Anyone watching is unlikely to forget the absolute bizarre story that Matt Gaetz proceeded to tell. This story involved a $25 million extortion threat against his father, Don Gaetz, to help free an American hostage in Iran that would then be paid back with a presidential pardon for Matt Gaetz on all these charges. So Matt Gaetz went on to Tucker Carlson and said, look, the real story is that my father was approached by the Department of Justice and they said, give us $25 million and we will get these charges dropped and we'll close down the investigation against your son. Okay. Gaetz demanded that the FBI release the tapes that they had in their possession of the recordings made by his father in the interviews with the extortionist. And he didn't hesitate for 1 second to name the alleged extortionist, and that person is David McGee. David McGee said he was a former prosecutor for the Northern District of Florida, who now worked at the prestigious Biggs and Lane law firm in Pensacola. And here he is. Okay, can I just pause for a minute and say, why do all these bizarre, crazy things happen in Florida? It's just like this mecca of trafficking and extortion and lost ballots and all this crazy stuff. Everything happens in Florida. He was resolute and unafraid when he was talking, and yet he sounded like an absolute lunatic. I know because I was watching live and I wasn't the only one who thought so. Tucker Carlson was clearly extremely annoyed and unconvinced by the end. And yet, 3.5 years later, we now know that everything he said was true. Bob Levinson was the man in Iran. So let me just clarify who Bob Levinson is. Bob Levinson had been or is still missing in Iran since 2007. He was, she'll go on to explain what he was doing, but you should know an American is missing in Iran. Okay. The official story about Bob Levinson is that he was a retired FBI agent who was contracted by a semi-off-the-books CIA unit to run a covert operation in Iran. But he was kidnapped from Kish Island following a meeting with an American fugitive living in Iran that had been arranged by a former NBC producer named Ira Silverman. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. This is crazy. So then she goes on to say, hey, look, I know this is sounding crazy, but keep reading or don't if you don't want to go chasing rabbits. Okay, so Levinson gets kidnapped in March of 2007, and his disappearance was acknowledged by George Bush in June of 2007 as concerning, but no one from the federal government will admit that Levinson was working for the CIA. And we continue. Let's see here. Where's the rest of it? Hang on one sec. Okay. Unbeknownst to anyone at the time, from 2009 into 2011, the FBI was running its own covert operation to get their retired agent back, and they had devised an ingenious plan to keep the whole thing off the books. So remember, let's just go back to the beginning. Wild and crazy tax collector in Florida, Joel Greenberg, has charges filed against him with the Department of Justice for all sorts of crazy things: child trafficking, using government funds to get hookers. I mean, he's bad news. He happens to also be friends with Matt Gaetz, so he goes to the Department of Justice and he says, "Hey, look, I could show you proof that a sitting, member of Congress is, having sex with minors if you reduce my sentence." And so that conversation happened. And so Matt Gaetz responds to that by going on to Tucker Carlson saying, here's what's really going on. The Department of Justice has tried to extort my father to pay for them to go into Iran and try to rescue this former FBI agent. That's what's really going on. And this whole business of accusing, I don't know if Matt Gaetz ever came out and denied the allegations against him, but I imagine he's like, look, this whole business of me, of, investigating me for sex with minors or whatever, that's, that's what's put out there. That's what's fielded out there by the New York Times. But the real story is that the DOJ tried to extort money from my father for this clandestine effort to go and rescue this former FBI agent. Okay, so you all caught up now? All right. Unbeknownst to anyone at the time, from 2009 to 2011, the FBI was running its own covert operation to get their retired agent back. And they had devised an ingenious plan to keep the whole thing off the books. So the FBI says, okay, our guy is missing in Iran. We need to get him back. What do we do? And this is what they did. They contracted with a Russian billionaire, Oleg Deripaska, to pay for the rescue mission, $20 million in total, in exchange for a fast-tracked green card for Deripaska and his family. So they go to the Russian oligarch, and the Russian oligarch says, "Oh, yeah, here you go, $20 million." Sorry, terrible accent. You go, here's $20 million as long as you fast track my family into America. Deal? Deal. So this is where you enter David McGee. So during his time at the Department of Justice, McGee worked in organized crime task force. That's how he knew Bob Levinson, the one who's missing in Iran. And because Bob Levinson specialized in Russian money laundering. So McGee became a liaison between the Levinson family and Deripaska. So McGee, who works for the FBI, goes to the Russian oligarch and says, help us get this nice guy, Bob Levinson, help us get him out of Iran. And he's also talking to the Levinson family. He's like being really open about this. Like, look, we're going to try to work with this family. We're going to pay for Bob to get back to the United States. We just want to keep you aware of what's going on. Okay, so he's acting as that liaison between the family and the people that he's trying to negotiate to help get Bob out of Iran. Okay, so she finds out that the investigator, Village Crazy Lady, also known as Mel, she finds out that Andrew McCabe was the FBI point man on the Deripaska deal. So if you recall, there was controversy around Andrew McCabe. You guys can go down that rabbit hole, on your own. Okay, but you'll remember that name. So anyway, the FBI team gets a couple proof of life videos, and they have a soft arrangement in place when the Clinton State Department steps in and shuts the whole thing down. So something got them spooked. What that was has never been disclosed. So it was all ready to go. They were working with the oligarch to pay the people who had, held poor Mr. Levinson, in Iran. They were holding him hostage or whatever. The oligarch agreed to pay $20 million in exchange for, the United States, giving them a fast track into the United States. And it was all working out when Hillary Clinton intervened and said, for some reason, and nobody really knows why. So after 2011, poor Bob Levinson, the kidnapped man, is never heard from again. All along, the Iranians have denied any involvement in his disappearance, of course. So eventually, the CIA gets desperate, and a handful of classified documents confirming that he was contracting with them on this covert mission in Iran are leaked to the Associated Press in 2013. Still, the Iranians don't budge. This was surprising because at this point, they no longer have any reason to lie. The Americans weren't lying anymore. It was time to start negotiations, but nope, the news was greeted with radio silence. So years go by and no more pictures or videos ever arrive. And then comes the Iranian nuclear deal of 2016. So, unbeknownst to most people, the Obama administration had negotiated the release of 4 Americans being held in Iran in exchange for the U.S. dropping charges against 7 Iranian nationals for sanctions violations. But Bob Levinson was not one of those Americans. So the American Jewish community was furious at the Obama administration for keeping him off of that negotiation list. They already saw the Iranian deal as a stab in the back to Israel. But when word broke about the prisoner exchange and Bob Levinson wasn't even on the list, many took it as a deliberate betrayal of American Jews as well. Now, flash forward some more. Trump takes office. He cancels the nuclear deal. Christine Levinson, that would be Bob Levinson's wife, the captured man. He's been captured since 2007. Christine Levinson sues Iran in U.S. court and is awarded $1.2 billion in January of 2020. And in March of 2020, the U.S. government officially declares Bob Levinson legally dead. Case closed. Right? Wrong. Now I'd like to pause here for a minute and remind people what happened on March 13th of 2020 when a national emergency was declared. Remember that? March 13th of 2020 is the exact date that the national emergency was declared. And usually when a national emergency is declared, when war is about ready to happen, or you get or your military or your intelligence agencies get the word out on the street that bombs are going to start dropping on a country, you do things like close down schools, close down hospitals. You tell people not to go to work and to shelter in place. Remember all that? So I remember being going in front of the camera, I would say around 2019, and saying out loud to the 3 or 4 people that ever bother to listen to me, I think we might be headed into some kind of conflict with Iran. Are we going to go to war with Iran? I literally asked that question verbatim on like a 15-minute live broadcast. So I find the timing of this really interesting with this whole thing with this, this Bob Levinson character allegedly being held by Iran. So at some point in the summer of 2020, a former Air Force intelligence officer named Bob Kent claims to have received news from his network in Iraq alleging that Bob Levinson was still alive. And Kent even claims he received pictures to prove it. So Kent contacts David McGee. Remember the FBI guy who's liaising between the Russian oligarch for the money to get Bob out of Iran and also the family. So Kent contacts David McGee, who then tells Kent about the last privately funded search and rescue for Bob Levinson. And that's when Kent hatches the plan to rope Don Gaetz into paying for this one. So they still haven't rescued poor Bob Levinson. After all this, he's still not rescued, even after Obama made a list of people to go rescue, and he wasn't on the list. So this dude who is an Air Force intelligence officer, Bob Kent, says, well, it didn't work last time. Maybe it'll work this time. Let's go get Don Gaetz, Matt Gaetz's father, to pay for a possible arrangement to buy Bob Levinson's freedom. So you're probably wondering at this point, how do these men know about the Matt Gaetz investigation? To my knowledge, that has never been revealed. But if I had to guess, I'd say someone in the Department of Justice or the FBI leaked that info to McGee, who then told Kent, the Air Force intelligence officer, about it when he was contacted. But that's still only half the answer. So now this is the part of the story where it gets even weirder. Part 3, the grand plan. So the grand plan is that on March 16th, 2021, Don Getz received his first text message from Bob Kent about the grand plan. And it went something like this. Hey, Don, in exchange for paying for our rescue mission of Bob Levinson, since it didn't work out last time, unnamed agents with powerful contacts in the Biden administration will convince the president to give your son Matt a full presidential pardon. We'll drop the investigation. We'll drop any looming charges. Okay, just give us $25 million and we'll do that for you so that we can represent Bob Levinson. Now, let me just pause here for a minute and say, what if we took Bob Levinson out of the picture? What if Bob Levinson isn't even a real person and they're just using Bob Levinson to extort money from each other and make all these crazy deals? If you take Bob Levinson and the story that he's been missing in Iran since 2007, and isn't it convenient that just when they were about to go in and rescue him, the Clinton State Department interrupted this rescue mission? So this is the part where I talk about those liminal spaces. I would argue that there is no Bob Levinson. And that in order to stop the rescue from happening, they needed Clinton in there to say, nope, we're going to shut the whole thing down. No explanation why. Because there's no man to rescue. Okay. And the money that his wife got, it was probably hush money. Okay. Or his alleged wife. It was probably hush money. So let's just, and if there was a Bob Levinson and he was doing a covert operation for the CIA, and he is a former FBI operator or operative, chances are if he was there, maybe he died like within just a few months or a year of his operation, and he's been dead a long time, and maybe he died of like a heart attack or food poisoning or something. He's in another country. You know what I'm saying? So something tells me this whole story, it just is so bizarre that it still doesn't pass the sniff test. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is where it's important that first you take the story of Matt Gaetz, which is that he had sex with minors or something, and that's why he's all over the New York Times and everyone in the world is talking about him today. You don't quite believe that story, but then there's this other story of his father being extorted out of $25 million to go and rescue a wayward rogue FBI agent that's doing covert missions for the CIA in Iran. Come on. Like, are we really supposed to believe this? This is why it makes a great Netflix story, right? So the price that Bob Getz was told that he would have to pay in order to rescue one Bob Levinson is $25 million. And basically, to me, what it sounds like is, you want these charges against your son to go away? Pay us $25 million. That's the real story, okay? It's very simple. Naturally, Getz Sr., Matt Getz's father, was incredulous. What in the world was this man talking about? Matt wasn't facing any sex trafficking charges. So Dad called son, so Don Getz called Matt Getz, who immediately told him to contact the local FBI office. The FBI suggested that Don meet with David McGee wearing a wire, and Don agreed. However, just before the meeting took place, Don requested a written acknowledgement from the FBI on the purpose of this investigation and meeting. He was worried something he said could be used against Matt in the case they still didn't know. In the case that they still didn't know anything about. The FBI was reluctant at first, but they eventually agreed. But the very next day, the New York Times ran the leak on the DOJ's case against Matt Gaetz. Okay, so going back and watching that Tucker Carlson, Matt Gaetz interview, everything he said finally made sense. The FBI had planned to use Don's meeting with McGee against Matt. So the quasi-immunity demand from Don quashed that. So they leaked the story to the New York Times and then buried the wiretapes. So McGee and Kent denied everything, of course. They said there was no extortion. Oh, no, we didn't go to Don Gaetz and try to extort money from him. What are you talking about? It was a simple proposition. They accused Matt of using this to distract from his charges. Okay. Now, a third man was eventually charged with wire fraud in relation to this case. And then the FBI just drops it all and pretends like none of it happened. But there's more because it still gets weird. So at the time that Don Getz was getting these messages from the former Air Force intelligence operative, Kent, and then the FBI guy, McGee, and McGee, of course, has been focused on one thing the whole time: get my guy, Bob Levinson, out of Iran. Just get him out. So the two of them devised a plan to get Don Getz to pay for the operation to get Levinson out of Iran, and they said, by helping us, you scratch my back, we'll scratch yours, and we'll get these charges dropped against your son. So at the same time that all this was happening and these conversations were taking place, Scott Adams, the Dilbert guy, receives a message from an acquaintance of his, Jacob Novak, who works as the media director for the Israeli consulate. Okay. And so the first one arrives the Saturday before the story breaks. So China's escalating water war on top of other asymmetric tactics is a new threat India faces. Representative Gaetz is the subject of a secret grand jury probe of sex with minors and possibly murder conspiracy. I trust the source. Charges and accusations are apparently credible. So, out of nowhere, Scott Adams, who's buddies with Jacob Novak, who works as the media director for the Israeli consulate, gets this weird scoop about Representative Gaetz, Matt Gaetz. Let's see what Scott does. What does Mr. Adams do? So the next two messages arrive on Wednesday, the 31st, after Gaetz went on to Tucker Carlson and revealed David McGee's name to the world. So somebody said, probably Scott says, the allegations against Matt Gaetz do not sound credible. And I agree, they're not credible. And somebody else says, I don't want to believe them, but my source says it looks bad from closer in. And then somebody says, I'm either Scott or Novak said, I'm betting against it, but the extortion counterclaim sounds credible. Yeah, same here. Has witnesses, apparently. So the backstory is this is screwing up my efforts to free Bob Levinson. Okay. Gaetz's dad was secretly finding us. So I'm very much wanting this to be untrue. I've got a commando team leader friend of mine nervously waiting for wire transfers to clear. So this burned Kent and Levinson, I can clear up the 50% of the story that isn't true. They have documents. Okay. So these are text messages that you're seeing. Now, to his credit, the whole thing was sketchy as hell to Scott Adams. So he took it upon himself to release Novak's messages. Good. Transparency is key. I mean, that's really important. If Scott had not done that, he would probably be in a pretty bad way right now. So I'm glad he just was like, okay, I got this information from, my friend Jacob Novak, who works for the Israeli consulate. I don't know what to do with it. Here you go. And he just made it public. So the Israeli consulate immediately distanced themselves from Novak's messages, but he was not fired or disciplined. Okay, so here's the wrap up. Remember Joel Greenberg? Remember him from the beginning of the story, the tax collector in some county in Florida, I think it's Seminole County, who pled guilty to sex trafficking, identity fraud, wire fraud, and a host of other charges in May of 2021. Remember that guy? Well, he was sentenced to 11 years in prison, with 10 of those coming from the mandatory minimum imposed by the sex trafficking charge. The Department of Justice did not close its case against Matt Gaetz until October of 2022. They never publicly acknowledged why he was not charged, although it becomes fairly obvious once you learn that Joel Greenberg had produced fake IDs for the underage girl in question. How can you convict someone of statutory rape when this woman was using a real state of Florida driver's license to present as being of age? But of course, because it's the swamp, that's not where Matt's troubles ended. The snakes in DC were going to milk that investigation for all it's worth. And when Gaetz went for McCarthy, remember that during the speaker fight, McCarthy and his allies plotted carefully to get their revenge. We saw the culmination of that plotting on full display. There are still lots of unanswered questions, like who is the we that Jacob Novak referenced in his texts to Scott Adams, and who leaked the info about the Gaetz case to Bob Kent, the Air Force guy that wanted to work with McGee, who was the FBI guy, who was all just trying to get Bob Levinson out of Iran. Was Joel Greenberg running a honeypot scheme? If so, for who? It sure would be nice to get an attorney general in office who actually gave a damn about answering any of those questions. Okay, so that's the end of her tweets. But so what I want to do is, that's very interesting. It's incredibly entertaining, and I certainly do feel that there is a Netflix story out of this. And my question at the end of the day, after we've learned everything that Miss Mel has shared with us, my question is, who's going to play Scott Adams? That's what I want to know. Okay, so let's go ahead and head over to just some really basic information about where I think Matt Gaetz is going to go next, and kind of like who he is now versus who he was before. So let me pull up his page. So obviously that's him. And one thing that, so I can get rid of her tweets in the background here. Okay. One thing that I wanted to remind people is that Matt Gaetz introduced a bill to ban members of Congress from trading stocks of companies that they regulate. So they banded together and stripped his nomination, or stopped his nomination. And so that's how the dirty game is played. Gaetz doesn't take AIPAC donor money and is one of the better voters in Congress. So it sounds like he was doing a few things to make himself look really good, like introducing this bill, which, which is great, right? Makes him seem like he's a real good guy. But I want to go into a little bit more about him. Now, according to some of the more popular people out there, he also has a podcast. So he's already said publicly that he's done. He's done with politics. He's not going back to his role in Congress. He's not going to do any of it. And it's even clear on his Wikipedia page. When asked if he would return, because he could, he said no, he's not going to do that. So I thought, okay, well, maybe he will just be like a podcaster. He's got the inside scoop on all this. He was, sort of the victim of this extortion thing from the FBI / DOJ / whatever. It's unclear if the allegations against him were even true. So I'm sure he has a lot to say about it. Maybe he'll just be like this really popular podcaster, and he'll be able to provide insight into other corrupted or methods that the DOJ engages in or the FBI engages in, right? So I thought, okay, well, maybe he's just going to be a podcaster. Okay. He's got this popular podcast. But then I thought, I don't know. That doesn't seem like, he's the son of this prominent attorney. He's the son of Don Gaetz, who is, currently a member of the Florida State Senate. He's a really prominent attorney in Florida. Like, I don't know. Like, just to become a podcaster after all that work, I don't know. This is where, you get people like this who are, um, their whole life centers around uh, what their family expects of you. And I have a feeling that Don Getz expects something more from Matt, his son, than just being the center of controversy around this story and then becoming a podcaster. Okay. I have a feeling his father is like, I want more for you. I want more from you. So where does that lie? Where does that if you need you don't just get to the point where you're in politics and you're moving up the ladder only to just fall down and be a podcaster. So what could you do to bring yourself back up? Well, you could do something like Hollywood does all the time, and you could marry into money. So let's take a look at Matt Gaetz's wife, Ginger Lucky. So, I got some tabs open I need to close, so just give me 1 second. All right, so Ginger Lucky works for one of the, or if not the largest consulting firms, accounting firms, KPMG, like in the world. She and Matt met at a fundraiser and then made their relationship serious when they went to Kimberly Guilfield's. Guilfield. I actually met Kimberly when she was married to Gavin Newsom briefly. She's a nice lady, but she worked for Fox News and then quit Fox News and married Gavin Newsom, divorced Gavin Newsom, and is now the fiance of Donald Trump Jr. So Ginger Lucky, who is currently Matt Gaetz's wife, met Matt Gaetz at Kimberly's birthday party at Mar-a-Lago. Okay. And she works for KPMG, which is a multinational accounting firm. So that's where she currently works. And then I also want to show you where she used to work. But let's take a look at KPMG's site really quickly. And here's KPMG's site, with KPMG opportunity is insane, la, 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 la. Oh, look at that. M&A, or is that M&A, made easy through AI. Suddenly, it's leaving politics and marrying her life is worth $2.5 billion. Yeah, Bert, typically people who are worth $2.5 billion and are and never had any problems in life, yeah, typically they're pretty good looking. Yeah. So so what I'm trying to say is that Matt Gaetz, he exits the political realm and he marries Ginger Lucky. Now, they spent quite a long time dating, didn't they? They spent quite a long time getting to know each other after they met at a fundraiser and then at Kimberly Guilfoyle's birthday party at Mar-a-Lago, right? No, they only spent 10 months dating and then they got married. So they only knew each other for 10 months before they got married. She's worth $2.5 billion. She works for the largest accounting slash consultant firm like in the world. And they're heavy into AI. They're heavy into the technology that I've been warning about for quite a few months now, which is why Appalachia and so many other regions are under mud because they want to get a hold of the elements and the natural sources there that will make AI go. So Matt Gaetz has left politics and he's moved into the the world that is going to basically create digital apartheid. He's not a good guy. Okay. So she so it always comes down to AI, and it also lately has been coming down um, to food, right? So she also worked for a company called Appeal, Apeel. Now, Appeal is a it's they're the company that made the film that goes over apples, and they say it's plant-based film and it keeps apples fresh, but it's all about food technology. They talk about the technology of food. They talk about you know keeping food fresh through these plant-based technological innovations. That's the company she worked for 5 years before she went over into working for KPMG. So not a good person. Sure, she may be hot, but she's not a good person. And she's worth $2.5 billion. Now, she's also related to Palmer Luckey. Palmer is her brother. And he is, let me find him. That's what he looks like. That's Palmer Luckey. He's the founder of Oculus, which is the virtual reality sort of game that basically destroyed, in my opinion, it destroys men. It destroys their ability to connect with real people. It makes it impossible to they can't date. I mean, there's a lot of men in the Bay Area that are addicted to virtual reality, and this guy created it. Palmer Luckey, and that's her brother. So now Matt Gaetz is related to people who literally destroy the fabric of society and literally destroy like the ability for men to procreate. Like their sperm count goes down because of this thing. I hate to be so, graphic, but virtual reality is one of the worst things that outside of social media is one of the worst things that has ever been created. Side note, I had a friend in the Bay Area who um is great. She's, very good looking, had, position with a large law firm, one of the largest law firms in the Bay Area for like her entire career. She has job security. She was born into money. She's great. She got involved with a guy who didn't have a job. He moved in with her and he spent, I don't know, she said something like between 8 and 12 hours a day in his virtual reality headset, and it nearly killed her. She gained a bunch of weight. She tried so hard to like meet him on his level. She became something she didn't recognize. She got really sick just from being around this individual who was so addicted to virtual reality. Well, this is the guy that created that. Eventually, thank goodness, they broke up. She kicked him out of her house, and she turned her life around again, and she's fine. But I'm telling you, virtual reality, especially for men, destroys the fabric of society. But not only that, Palmer is, so that's what he was doing. He was the founder of Oculus. Now he is running the nation's largest private defense startup. So he's working with the Defense Department now. So Matt Gaetz has, his father said to him, this whole political thing, there's no money in that. This controversy will be created around you. Go hurry up and get married. Marry into money. Okay. Make sure that you marry up, marry into money. So Matt Gaetz went from being just a millionaire to now a multi-billionaire by marriage. So I guess that's what this broadcast was about, was the real story about Matt Gaetz and who he really is. I think that there's a lot of, intrigue with this story about him being, his father being extorted, for money to try to do this covert rescue mission for this dude, Bob Levinson, who's been missing since 2007. But the real story is basically there's no money in politics anymore. There's money in defense contracting. There's money in like fake food and creating food technology, which is what his wife is into. There's money in AI. There's money in, like I said, defense contracting. So that's where the real story is, I think. And let's see. Yeah. I don't think there's really much else to say. I think that's what we can expect from, from him in the future, is that he will either sit on the council for some of these companies. He'll somehow benefit. His wife will usher him into these different roles. You know what I'm saying? So looking at the liminal spaces that are in between the stories was the point of this broadcast. And liminal means like shadow. It means the stuff that isn't presented to you in an obvious way. It's in there and you can see it, but it's not really obvious. And so that's where we step in and we look at those we look at those stories and then we look behind the stories of the stories. So we know that this main story came out about Matt Gaetz and why he's being smeared all across mainstream media. And then we know there's another story behind that having to do with a rogue FBI agent who was doing covert work for the CIA in Iran, and he's been missing in Iran since 2007, and how the FBI and the DOJ were working together to try to extort money out of Matt's father. Okay. But the real story, I think even the story that we're supposed to see is the one, of course, that no one's talking about, which is that he has now transitioned into, through marriage, he's transitioned into the AI food technology industry, which is all the things that we as humans should be, or as people should be really concerned about. These are anti-life programs, anti-life business arrangements that will benefit the billionaires greatly. I mean, he only knew his wife for 10 months before he met her. She's worth $2.5 billion, and her brother is doing defense contract work. So, and he's worth a couple of $1 billion. So this is not, there are going to be people that are going to be coming out and saying, oh, he's a hero. And, he fell on his sword and he should go back to his role. He won't. There's no money there. There's no money in politics anymore. There used to be, but there isn't. It's all about AI. It's all about anti-life, anti-human, anti-people policy, contracts, and organizations that will continue to try to technologize or try to make us more of a tech-based life instead of something really true. I mean, we're talking about he's now married to the woman whose brother is one of the reasons why, I hate to say it, there's such low sperm count in men. It's, one of the reasons why I went for decades not being able to really date anybody, because I couldn't compete with virtual reality. Those virtual reality headsets have been around for a long time. I had like I said, I told you a personal story. I had a friend whose boyfriend was addicted to it, and it was the worst experience of her life. And she was just like, it was horrible. I never knew that it was so bad. And so now he's married into people like that who just literally destroy the fabric of society. It's a reason. One of the reasons why we have such a low birth count, in this country, is because of his invention. So, I mean, I but mostly what I wanted to do was focus on those liminal spaces, those shadow spaces between what we're told and then the follow-up story to that, and then how a person's actions and behaviors can really tell you who they are. I mean, he married Ginger Lucky, the sister of Palmer Lucky. That should be enough. And if you know who these two people are, that should be enough to tell you that he's moving on up into the anti-life, anti-human, anti-people world of technology. And he'll get he'll see the benefits for that. He was a millionaire when he was in politics. Now he's a billionaire. Do the math, right? So I guess that's all I have to say. Hopefully you got something out of this. And I'll see you. I won't see you this Friday because it's the day after Thanksgiving. So I'll see you in 2 weeks, and I'll do another reading. All right, you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you got something out of this. Have a great weekend and have a great rest of your week. And of course, have a happy Thanksgiving. Bye.